Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Davey Peppers, and today we have a wonderful little slice of some spooks for you today. So first off, we are going to do a review of the brand new Jim Cummings film, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, before we step over to Netflix for Vampires vs. the Bronx. Then we're going to go a few months back for the Elijah Wood vehicle, Come to Daddy. And then we're going to finish off with the final piece of the Karate Kid retrospective that I've been doing with the 2010 remake of the original film. All right? So let us start with a review of a movie that I was very much looking forward to, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, written, directed by, and starring Jim Cummings, who is probably most well known for the film Thunder Road that he did 2 years ago. A really clever, micro-budgeted comedy drama about a cop dealing with grief and a lot of trauma and anger issues. Here he plays another police officer, Officer John Marshall, who is a recovering alcoholic, who is the son of the sheriff, played by Robert Forster in his final film role, and the movie is actually dedicated to the memory of Robert Forster, who is just so good. He's great in this, he's great in everything. If you haven't ever seen Jackie Brown, it is probably Forster's best performance and maybe the best character Tarantino's ever written, so definitely check that out. Rest in peace, Robert Forster, you beautiful, beautiful man. But John is having a rough time. He can't really seem to connect with his daughter. His wife doesn't, or his ex-wife just doesn't respect him in practically any way, and he's looking for something to prove himself on. He seems to be next in line to be the sheriff once his father finally steps down, but he doesn't have anything really to his own name. And then in this small town, suddenly people start dying really horrific, in really horrific ways. And it seems to be in line with a werewolf that is attacking the town. John does not believe in this. He says, no, werewolves do not exist. This is just a really tall man doing a lot of very weird murders, and we have to stop this guy and we have to find him. And the chunk of this, the big chunk of this movie is him and some of the other officers, including Officer Julia, played by Ricky Lindholm, who is really good here and gets a chance to show off a lot of comedic chops that she has honestly not been able to really show outside of her personal work with stuff like Garfunkel and Oates. She's often kind of regulated to a smaller side role, and here she just really gets to shine as a bit of heart for the movie and gets to show how good she can really be, which is one of the big surprises of this movie, because I didn't even know she was in it, and she might be my favorite performance in the movie. She's just really good at this. But the movie is not, it doesn't really go full horror ever. There are a few moments that are surprisingly potent in terms of being a genre film, but this is a Jim Cummings film, and what he does best here is character drama, a lot of really dry, weird comedy, and making the audience feel sympathy for an incredibly broken character. Much like his character in Thunder Road, this character of Officer John Marshall is an absolute wreck of a human being who is not a terribly good person. He is relatable and understandable, and he is trying so hard, but he is the worst, kind of, for a lot of this movie. And much like in Thunder Road, seeing that character's journey is the true joy and the true gift that is within this film. It does have a lot of the horror comedy elements, because it is a horror comedy, but it is much more interested in the character work and the general atmosphere and environment of this town of Snow Hollow. And that's, while the drama work is not unexpected and is not necessarily shocking, especially considering what Cummings did 2 years ago with Thunder Road, which, if you have not seen it, is a really, really special movie that myself and a lot of my friends really connected with. So if you get a chance to watch it, I believe it's on some of the streaming services. You should definitely check it out if you get a chance to. And in the exact same way, you should probably really check this out. I know it's not gotten as much love from my inner circles as Thunder Road did, but I think a lot of that is down to Jim Cummings as a performer and as a filmmaker trying to stretch his abilities, not necessarily thin, but he's trying to stretch them to their limits, which I understand why some people wouldn't totally connect with this film in the same way that they connected with Thunder Road, but there is a really palpable energy to this movie and a lot of inventive and creative ways of telling a story that a less confident and a less sure of himself filmmaker would not have done. There is a version of this movie that leans way harder into the horror elements or way harder into the comedy. And both those movies would probably still be really good. But the thing that works so much about The Wolf of Snow Hollow is that it is a powerful drama. The final moments of this movie, which obviously I won't go into detail about, but have nothing to do with the horror elements and even nothing really to do with the comedy. It is just about the characters. And that is the thing that has stuck in my head over the past couple days thinking about The Wolf of Snow Hollow, is how much I really liked spending time with these characters and how real they feel. And a lot of that is down to the performances. As mentioned, Cummings, Lindholm, and Forster are just doing great work, as well as Jimmy Tatro from American Vandal and Bad Education, who I just really like seeing whenever he shows up. He's just so much fun at playing just the most down on his luck guy in the world. He just can never seem to catch a break. And I just always have a lot of fun whenever he's on screen. But the thing about this film is that it almost... There's the worst thing about it, I would say, is that it is being released right in the middle of October, right prime in the middle of spooky season. And again, there are moments of genuine tension and genuine fear in this film, especially as the second and third acts ramp up, and the violence is real and it is palpable in this movie. However, a lot of it is just there to enhance the character work, and it is just there to enhance the comedy. And this movie is really, really funny as well. It reminded me a lot of Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die from last year, which is a movie that I liked a lot more than a lot of people that I know did. I know it was a relatively divisive film because it goes super meta and super weird pretty much for no reason, especially by the end where it just throws any and all logic out the window. And while Wolf of Snow Hollow is nowhere near as wacky as that movie is, I feel like it has a similar identity to what Jarmusch was trying to do by taking this relatively standard small town horror slasher adjacent type story, werewolves versus zombies with The Dead Don't Die, and making a more bare bones humanist comedy with it. And that's a really exciting thing, and it's very weird that two movies within 2 years could come out that are extremely different in every other way, but seem to have a almost identical philosophy on how to tell a joke and how to tell a story. And that is something that is really cool, because if we get more movies like this, more movies that like to play in the horror genre and play on the outskirts of it, then I think we can get more movies that have this weird genre blend. Thunder Road is for as well written as it is, and how much it relies on Jim Cummings' performance, who he is good in Wolf of Snow Hollow, he is great in Thunder Road, and I don't want that to be taken as a criticism of his performance here. It is just that Thunder Road is pretty much just a vehicle for him as a performer, if nothing else, whereas here it is a much more fleshed out and holistic movie that he is playing the lead in. So it's less impressive, his performance here, but I do think overall the film is much more balanced than Thunder Road was. And again, that's not a criticism of Thunder Road either. I love that movie, and I kind of love The Wolf of Snow Hollow too. It is just, they have very different strengths, and they're showing Cummings' different strengths as a triple threat filmmaker, where Thunder Road is pretty much a vehicle for him to be a performer above all else. Here, he is really flexing how to write different characters and how to direct things that require a defter hand and a greater understanding of the camera than stuff like the admittedly incredible one shot at the opening of Thunder Road, but that is just setting the frame and going all out as an actor. Here we are seeing him grow exponentially in different ways, and it kind of cements, at least for me, how much I want to see this guy continue to make movies, and how much I want to see him just try as hard as he can and make as much weird stuff as humanly possible, because if Thunder Road and The Wolf of Snow Hollow are anything to go by, then this is something, this is a special filmmaker, right? This is something unique and different, and there is something in this guy's blood that reminds me of the early stuff by the Duplass brothers, or Joe Swanberg, or I guess now with the horror connections, people like Adam Wingard or Ty West. Like, it's not the mumblecore group holistically, it's adjacent to that, but it has that same energy, that same spunky, furious desire to make things that, as someone that is interested in making things at some point in his life, it just makes you feel alive. And it makes you feel like anything is possible. And that just is it's just so cool. And it is so life-affirming and life-giving watching a movie like this and seeing Cummings as a filmmaker in every aspect grow and change and mold himself into something completely new and completely different. I don't want to oversell this movie because it is weird, and it's imperfect because it's a movie and no movie is perfect. The tonal balance does not work for everyone. I've spoken to some people who didn't love Thunder Road, and I've spoken to some people who love Thunder Road even more than me, who just did not connect with this movie. But if you like humanist drama and really dry comedy, and if you, like I do, love horror movies and love monster movies, but aren't walking into this exclusively looking for some gnarly monster murder time, then I think that there's a lot to really love about this movie. It's short, it is quick, it gets in and it gets out, and there is really not a drop of fat on this movie. It goes, and it honestly is probably a little too lean for its own good. There are moments where severe plot elements will happen so quickly that I'm spending the next 2 minutes playing catch up and trying to figure out what's going on. And I think a lot of that is because I feel like Cummings as a writer is still trying to get the strong grip that he is growing as an actor and is growing as a director. I think he's still trying to get that strong grip on the structure and the base levels of screenwriting structure that he doesn't seem to totally have. And again, I don't want that to sound like an exact criticism of this movie or even of him. It is just a natural process of people making more movies. He's really good at dialogue at this point. He is great at character work, and I think in a couple more films, in a couple more years, he is going to really show how talented and how skilled he is, because and a lot of this is because he has been very vocal online about the process of making things and about the process of trying to figure this stuff out. He's been a little bit of a film Twitter golden boy, at least during the release of Thunder Road. But it is really easy, at least for me, to see his growth and see him ironing out the kinks of his own style and his own flaws as a filmmaker in real time, which is always such a cool thing to see. And it is an excellent case study. If you want to make films at some point, you should watch Thunder Road and The Wolf of Snow Hollow, if for no other reason than to examine how someone grows over such a small period of time, and how the connective tissue between these two films shines through, and how different aspects of the nature of making movies can grow or shrink with each individual installment. As a student of film, you should absolutely watch this movie, if for no other reason than to just learn little things, because Cummings is maybe a little bit too blunt for his own good and has somewhat inadvertently, I suppose, made an excellent teaching tool for how to structure and how to make a really lean genre blending film. And if you're just an audience, I think you should watch this anyway, because I had a blast with this movie. Rest in peace, Robert Forster, Ricky Lindholm, do more things. Y'all should listen to Garfunkel and Oates if you haven't, because she and Kate Micucci are incredibly talented performers. And Jim Cummings, good on you, dude. You made another really solid movie. Wolf of Snow Hollow gets 8 out of 10 stars. Now, if you'll stick around after the ad break, we are going to take a look at the Netflix film Vampires vs. the Bronx, which released last week. So stick around and I'll see you then.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Alright, lovelies, we are Looney Tunes back in action, and we are going to pivot to Netflix for a review of Vampires vs. the Bronx, another comedy horror film that came out just this last week. And unlike The Wolf of Snow Hollow, this is much more of what you would traditionally think of with a horror comedy. So, as made very clear through the title, this is a vampire film where a group of children in the Bronx, in New York, are in the process of trying to save their community from a real estate company that is starting to buy up various properties and businesses around them. And they start to suspect that, hey, maybe these gentrifying people might be literal vampires, which is already an inspired and very funny metaphor for gentrification, that the bloodsuckers are literal bloodsuckers, and that just makes me really happy. But what this movie is trying to do is, outside of having the commentary on gentrification, which I do quite like, it is really trying to capture like the Goonies 80s era of movies of this ilk, of these adventure kind of dark movies that are really about children trying to save the world around them from something otherworldly or not entirely within the norm. So the cast of this film, the child cast of this film includes Jaden Michael, Gerard W. Jones, Coco Jones, and a couple others. And this is just... Oh, and Gregory Diaz the Fourth. My apologies. And these kids have such a screen presence. So quickly into this film, they feel so realistic and natural in both just on screen and in this world that you immediately buy them and immediately want them to succeed and do well. They play the various conflicts of their characters well. These aren't... Obviously, this is an 85-minute horror comedy. These characters aren't super complicated or super deep, but they hold on to their childness, or their teenageness, I suppose, is the better way to say it, but they hold on to that youth so well in the face of the wackier events of the story, and they hold on to their individual character traits so earnestly and honestly that it just is really hard to not immediately fall in love with these kids and fall in love with this world. And a lot of that is due to how solid these performances are. The adult cast, which is a group of probably much more recognizable names, I would say, includes Sarah Gadon, Method Man, Shea Wiggum, and Chris Redd as various members of the vampire cult or various members of this community. Method Man as a priest is really inspired casting, and when he gets to just come in and just chastise these children for just causing chaos around his neighborhood, it's really funny. And this is honestly, I would say, the first time I've really liked Method Man as a performer, and he gets, or as an actor, I should say, and he just has a lot of things that he's able to do here. He has a lot of fun with it, which I was honestly not necessarily expecting, but I have nothing but positive things to say about kind of all the performances here. Shea Wiggum is just doing his Shea Wiggum thing. He's just being gruff and intimidating. Sarah Gadon, who has really never gotten the spotlight that I think she particularly deserves, is just having so much fun, just annihilating the scenery here as a companion and a friend to these boys, and slowly some sinister things start to be revealed about her and her character. I became familiar with her in the movies Antiviral and Enemy by Brandon Cronenberg and Denis Villeneuve, respectively, and after those films, she really has not had a lot of roles that have really stood out. She had a small role in like Amazing Spider-Man 2 and stuff. She just has not really had the thing to really break her out, and I'm sure that this won't break her out, but it is nice to see her getting more roles where she can actually, pun so intended it is almost a crime, sink her teeth into, as it were. The movie is directed by Oz Rodriguez and is written by him and Blaise Hemingway, based on a story by Rodriguez. And for a debut film, and honestly a really a debut piece for most of the cast and most of the behind-the-scenes crew, this is the exact kind of thing you want, A, from a Netflix original, and B, from a kind of weird find in the middle of October. it's PG-13. It's ultimately pretty bloodless and pretty family-friendly. I mean, there's language and general violence, but nothing super out of the ordinary. I mean, if this movie came out in the 80s, it would be rated PG, because you could say the F word once in a PG movie in the 80s, and that is still maybe my favorite fact about film history. But this is just, it's a very... Wholesome seems like the wrong word to describe a horror comedy about vampires and gentrification, but wholesome is honestly probably the best word that I could use to describe this movie, because it just makes you feel good about being a person, I should say. Just watching these kids running around and having a good time and trying to fight for something brings you some life, or at least it brought me some life. I like this world, I like these characters, I like these actors a lot, and for a movie this lean, which has clearly a very small budget and doesn't have the luxury of going as far with a lot of its effects, even lesser so than something like The Wolf of Snow Hollow did, the way that this movie compensates for not having a lot of space to go out there with the horror and having to really rely on some really clever camera tricks, nothing out of the ordinary, but just stuff that shows a understanding of the history of the genre. But through those camera tricks and the writing and the character work, it never feels restrained by its budget. And that is something that I can say for it and The Wolf of Snow Hollow, is that they are clearly low budget movies if you know what to look for, but if you don't know what to look for, there is nothing about it that feels cheap. It feels like it belongs where it is. It's a little cheesy, it's a little silly, and it's a little rubbery, but it's also a PG-13 horror comedy about kids fighting vampires that want to destroy their neighborhood. It is going to be silly, and if it's not silly, then I don't know what it's supposed to be. So yeah, I really dug this movie. It's not perfect. There are a lot of things about it that don't totally work for me, and I think a lot of that is just my personal taste, wanting it to maybe go a little darker or have a little more stuff to do, but I can't honestly say that any of those things are flaws of the film as a whole. It is trying to do something, and it succeeds exceptionally well at what it is trying to do. And if I was like 12, 13, if I was the little preteen horror junkie that I was back at that age, and someone said, hey, there's a new movie on Netflix, it's PG-13, which means you don't have to lie to your parents and watch it illegally on your computer, and you can just watch it and enjoy it, I would have eaten this thing up and probably watched it 4 or 5 times and probably made my friends watch it with me, because that's what I did with basically every horror comedy that I could get my hands on in any way. I would just always show them to my friends and be like, all right, you guys are coming over? Cool, we're watching Tucker and Dale versus Evil again, because horror comedies are so good. I love them so much, and this is the sort of movie that is not going to go down in history, at least for me, as one of the great horror comedies. But if I was 12 or so when this came out, this would probably be one of those movies that really captured my soul and really made me fall in love with this weird genre blend, in the same way that a movie like Gremlins did for me at that age, or being able to go see The Cabin in the Woods was for me. There are going to be people that fall in love with horror movies because of Vampires versus the Bronx. And even if I hated this movie, which I don't, but even if I did, then it would be incredibly, immeasurably valuable for that reason alone, just because it is capturing a lot of current concerns about gentrification and about identity and stuff, and also because it's fun and it's funny, and it is just not even immature, but it is just clean enough to be accessible to a lot of people, and it being on Netflix just amplifies that. The fact that anyone right now can turn on Netflix and watch this 86-minute little bundle of joy is fantastic, and I really hope that this has the legs that I think that it can have, and show young people how awesome a good horror comedy can be. Because whenever one of these comes around, whenever a genre movie with a lot of humor and a lot of heart on its bones comes around, it is some of the most exciting stuff to come out of any given year. And I might be harder on this movie just because the one thing that I think we've gotten a lot of this year is really good dark comedies, between The Wolf of Snow Hollow and Spontaneous and The Lodge, and even moving to stuff like Palm Springs and Vivarium, like these weird, at least I think, really, really funny movies that have a lot of interesting genre stuff to talk about and interesting ways of kind of toying with the structure and the tropes of the genres that they live in. There's just something real nice about this year if you are the kind of person that loves these sorts of movies, and I clearly am. So no, Vampires vs. the Bronx is not the one that is made for me, but also, I'm 22. I don't think it's supposed to be made for me. It is supposed to be made for the people that are just learning how good a proper spook can be, and learning how having some murder and having some jokes at the same time can be really effective. This movie has a ton of heart. It has some really great jokes. The performances, as I mentioned, all are really solid. If there's not even a weak point, but I guess Shea Wiggum, just because he's doing what you expect him to do, which is a good job being big and scary and intimidating, so he's not as much of a revelation as these children. But again, that's not even really a criticism. The only reason why my score for this might seem a little bit low is just by virtue of this not hitting me at the age where I can adore it. Because I like it. I like it a good deal, and I've recommended it to a couple people already. But I'm no longer in the place where I know a lot of pre-teenagers, because I'm not one of them anymore. So if you know a lot of pre-teenagers, especially the weird pre-teenagers that, you know the kind of person, the weird people that like this sort of thing, recommend this to them, get them to watch it. It's gonna make a lot of new weird kids. And that is so good. Because that means that more people will like the things I talk about, and that means more people will listen to this show. And that is good for me. I'm only somewhat kidding. Vampires vs. the Bronx gets 7 out of 10 stars, and is available now on Netflix. Alright, now if you'll stick around just a little bit longer through this next ad break, we are going to cover the Elijah Wood vehicle Come to Daddy, before finishing off with a review of The Karate Kid 2010 as the final pièce de résistance of my Karate Kid retrospective. See you then.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are Backstreet's back, alright? So now we are going to do a review of the Ant Timpson film Come to Daddy, a dark comedy thriller horror film starring Elijah Wood. So this was on my radar because it has, by a lot of people that I really respect, been listed as one of the hidden gems of this year, especially in the horror thriller general genre market. And I wanted to check it out because I really, really love Elijah Wood, both as an actor and as a producer. The stuff that he's been doing recently, or honestly ever since finishing up Lord of the Rings, he always seems to pick just the weirdest things to really sink his teeth into. Films like Cooties and Grand Piano and the Maniac remake, which is so good. Where even when it's stuff that I don't personally like very much, like Nacho Vigalando's Open Windows, there is still some really interesting stuff in there, and I'm always glad to see it, and I'm always glad to see him in movies, even if they don't particularly speak to me. And unfortunately, for as much as I respect it, and as much as I like what it's doing thematically and with its horror and with its kind of ultra-violence, Come to Daddy ultimately did not really do it for me. Ant Timpson is probably best known for making the film The Greasy Strangler from a couple years back, which I still have not seen, because everyone that loves it describes it in a way that kind of made me go, yeah, this one does not seem to be very much my kind of thing. It's got a lot of gonzo, like, intentionally very disturbing for the sake of disturbingness, at least from what I have heard. I can't really speak to it because I haven't seen the film, and I would like to watch it at some point, but watching Timpson's follow-up, Come to Daddy, did not inspire a ton of confidence for me, even though I can totally see what people see in this film. So the film follows Norval Greenwood, played by Elijah Wood, who is a musician. He's a recovering alcoholic, and he is trying to figure out what's up with his father, who left him when he was a young child. He gets a letter from his dad saying, hey, I'm sorry that I left you, and I'm sorry that I left your mom. Come meet me, we'll hang out, we'll get to actually know each other. And so Norval shows up at this really beautiful Oregon beachside cabin and starts to get to know his father, this man named Brian, who doesn't seem to want him there. He's a drunk, he's angry and verbally abusive and kind of violent, and he starts to threaten Norval time and time again, and really just makes him feel unsafe. And that is about the first third of the movie. And then his father dies while threatening him with a knife. He has a heart attack and just keels over. And then things get weird and things get really violent. So the issue with discussing or reviewing a movie like Come to Daddy is that the movie proper doesn't really start in full until about halfway through, and that was the first indicator that A, I totally get why people love this movie, and I totally get why this is not for me. Because this structure of this very slow burn kind of erupting into the ultra-violence, which is a similar thing that happens with a movie Mandy, which I also am not a huge fan of, even though so many people adore that movie, is very representative of the exploitation era from the 70s, which a lot of people have a ton of affinity for. I have never really gotten into. It reminds me a lot of films like Bone Tomahawk and Brawl in Cell Block 99 that just don't totally work for me, even though I enjoy a lot of aspects of them. And I do enjoy a lot of aspects of Come to Daddy. A lot of the performances are really fun. The violence is gnarly and brutal, and Elijah Wood centers it all in a very realistic way, in the way that he does so good. He's got these big, bright blue eyes that just want things to work out and is being thrown into these increasingly bizarre and seemingly disconnected sequences of insanity. And he grounds it all in such a wonderful way that he really does with almost all of these types of films. He does the exact same thing in Cooties and Grand Piano, which, if you have not seen Grand Piano, it is phone booth, but on a piano, and it is awesome, and you should totally check it out. But with this film, a lot of the exploitation elements just do not really work for me. Exploitation as a genre, as I've said, just has never been something that I've been particularly invested in my horror and in my genre films. I like Ozploitation, I like the Australian ones, but outside of that, I've never really gotten on board with the generally more gonzo style of crafting a horror film, and that's just on me and on my personal taste, so I can't really say that this movie isn't good. I will say that it is not for me, and I think describing it as a more traditional thriller comedy or horror comedy is doing a disservice to the film and doing a disservice to the viewers, because I feel like if I had known going in the sort of experience that I was getting, I probably would have ended up liking this a little bit more than I did, which is unfortunate, but I would argue ultimately understandable. The cast gets rounded out with Martin Donovan, who doesn't have a ton to do here, but kind of helps match Elijah Wood in grounding the film, and Michael Smiley as one of the ultimate big bads of the movie. Michael Smiley, who at least I know best in his role as the Reverend Green from Edgar Wright's The World's End, who is so much fun in that movie, and he's having a ton of fun here. He really gets to just exist as this grimy, slimy person who is just out for blood, to the point where when the film ends and he gets the comeuppance that comes to the bad guys in movies for the most part, he is just relishing every single moment of it and having so much fun. And honestly, the performances and the aesthetic of the gonzo exploitation-ness of the film are the things that really save this for me. Again, it's a movie that does exactly what it is trying to do and does it very well, but the disconnect comes entirely on my end when I look at the clear inspirations for this film and the things that it is trying to do, and I just cannot help but say, I kind of wish that you had done something different. But I can't fault the movie for doing what it did, because it is clearly setting out for a goal, and Ant Timpson very clearly knows exactly what he is trying to do as a filmmaker. This is kind of the half of Elijah Wood's horror and genre career that I am not a fan of, but it furthers the point that I made at the beginning of this piece, where I just like what he's doing. I like that he is involved in these weird movies. I like that he is putting a really recognizable and noticeable face on some strange stories. Between this and the aforementioned films and the stuff that he's produced, like Mandy and A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and the TV show Wilfred, which I adore, the cinematic landscape is better because of what Elijah Wood is doing as a producer and as an actor. And that is something that I can never argue, and I can never really fault, even if there are pieces of his repertoire as a financier and as a businessman and as a performer that I'm not a huge fan of. Although I've never really disliked any of his performances, I will say. It's just kind of the roles that he chooses that don't often, not even often, but there are times where they just really do not connect with me. But he so clearly loves what he's doing, and he so clearly wants more than anything else to just see these weird movies be birthed into the world. And that is kind of the ultimate thing for someone who had a lot of success at a very young age, is that they can take that success and take the money and the clout that they have been awarded through working as a young child to young adult actor and just pouring money into stuff that will probably not produce a lot of financial returns, but will create new experiences and new things that are just exciting and are different and are weird. Earlier this year, he produced the film Color Out of Space, which I absolutely hate. I think the movie is terrible. But it is good that it exists, and it's good that Come to Daddy exists. I don't hate this movie anywhere near as much as I hate something like Color Out of Space. It's just not for me. And that is both sad and distressing because I really wanted to love this movie, but also it is the best thing that I can say about a movie that I don't care for, because if you like this kind of thing, if you really dig these exploitation films, or kind of this new wave of exploitation that's been coming out recently over the past 10 or so years, then why are you listening to this? You should be watching this movie immediately. If you like kind of the slow burn and then the explosion of ultraviolence, then this is the movie for you, and this is the 2020 movie that you need to see above all else. Trying to put myself in that headspace then, is the violence awesome? No, but in a good way. The thing with exploitation that I've never really gotten on board with is that the violence is so extra and it is so gruesome, but it never seems to... It seems to take itself very seriously, and it seems to take itself in such a way that is almost trying to comment on it, but never seems to land it, at least for me. That was my big problem with Brawl in Cell Block 99 from a couple years back, is that when it goes so intense and it goes so gruesome, it never seems to... It doesn't wink at the audience. And I know that sometimes the wink can be annoying, and it can be annoying for me too. However, if you're going to go so dark, you either need to know exactly what you're doing, Clockwork Orange, or you need to have a little bit more fun with it. The horror comedies that I really love, stuff like Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, which is as gory and as gruesome, if not more, than a film like Come to Daddy, but it's also funny and goofy and doesn't take the violence supremely seriously. It has the similar problem to something like the video game The Last of Us Part 2, where it has these moments of incredible blood and gore, but it seems to... I don't even want to say it seems ashamed of itself, but that's probably the closest analog that I can have to how I feel about this, is that it is trying to hold back, and it is trying to be an earnest exploration of this violence simply through showcasing it, and I don't think it totally works. I compare it as well to a series like The Boys, which just wrapped up its second season, and I loved, which is also supremely violent and is supremely serious and is trying to say stuff with its characters and with its action, but it also knows when to use the violence as a punchline. And I think there are moments in Come to Daddy that are using the violence as a punchline. There are moments, especially near the end, that did get a really good laugh out of me. But I think overall it is so bleak so quickly that I did not find the tonal balance that I was really looking for. When I think of violent, bleak comedies, the gold standard for me, at least as of this like indie horror boom that's been happening recently, I say recently, like the past 10 years, which is recent in the scope of movies, but whatever, is Cheap Thrills, which is a fantastic, just a stellar dark comedy that just slowly, gradually gets crazier and crazier and crazier, kind of holding you in this semblance of reality so that by the time it completely explodes, you're on board with the violence and you're on board with the comedy, because it knows how to strike that balance so well. And I don't think that Come to Daddy strikes that balance in a way that I can connect with. I can't deny the effect that this movie has had on a lot of people, because people keep talking about it and they keep telling me how good it is. And I am disappointed that it was not for me, but something, other people have different opinions, different strokes, different folks. Something that I keep getting told by my therapist, even though I don't agree, and I am clearly the almighty harbinger of good opinions. Come to Daddy is not for me. I give it 5 out of 10 stars. But if you like this sort of thing, then you need to be watching this immediately, because this is the thing that you are looking for this year. And Godspeed, God bless you, and I am worried about you. But in the best way, in a friend way. So if you'll stick around through this final ad break, we are going to come back and finish out with the final piece of the Karate Kid retrospective that I've been doing, where we discuss the 2010 remake of the original Karate Kid. See you then.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
And we are back in black. Hit the sack. I don't remember the rest of the words to Back in Black by AC/DC, and I'm pretty sure I even got that second line wrong. But there's a reason why I'm doing Back in Black for this bit, is because we are going to be talking about the 5th and final portion of the Karate Kid retrospective that I've been doing. The 2010 remake of the original film, simply titled The Karate Kid, although it was titled The Kung Fu Dream in China, and producers originally wanted to call it The Kung Fu Kid in America. Although one of the producers, Jerry Weintraub, completely nixed the idea and said, no, we are going to still be calling it The Karate Kid, which is good for brand recognition. But here's the first problem with this movie. They don't do karate. They learn Kung Fu, because this movie is set in China, and they learn Chinese Kung Fu instead of Japanese Okinawan karate. So, the problem with the Karate Kid remake from 2010 is that talking about it is less a discussion of the film itself, and is more a litmus test to see how much affection I have found for this franchise in the 3 or so weeks that I have had from watching the first film to finishing out the retrospective. And so that is really the question that needs to be dealt with here is, do I really love the original Karate Kid enough to be upset when it is completely mangled with almost no reverence for the original film? And the answer is, fortunately for me and for my affection for the franchise, yes. I do love this series, and maybe that's just Stockholm Syndrome after watching 2 good movies and 3 bad ones, but I really do like this world and I like these characters. So seeing a remake that really just kind of walks all over what made the first film itself is a very surreal experience. This movie isn't terrible. It's not. It's a better film than The Karate Kid Part 3 and the next Karate Kid. However, it is the one that is easily the most baffling, just because it is ostensibly a remake of that first film, and it gets almost none of it right. So the movie stars Jaden Smith as 12-year-old Dre Parker. He and his mother, played by Tara P. Henson, are moving to China for his mother's job from Detroit, and it's for the first act or so, it is pretty much the exact same setup as the original film. Kid in a new place, he's starting to get bullied by some kids. There's a girl that he likes, and he doesn't have any way to defend himself or to really find his place in this new space. And he meets Jackie Chan's character, Mr. Han, the Mr. Miyagi counterpart, who reluctantly decides to teach him martial arts in order to give him a way to defend himself and preserve his honor. Outside of the very, very real issue that this movie is called The Karate Kid and they do not do karate, which I cannot explain how frustrating that is for me as someone who likes things to make sense and be in order. The main issue with this film is that the characters are so young. Jaden Smith is not a bad performer here. He is doing the role serviceably as a young performer playing a very young character. But what made that first film work so well is because it is focused on people around the 16 and 17-year-old range. They are pumped full of hormones, and that brings a lot of volatility and a lot of intensity to what is going on with the martial arts aspect of the film and with the attempt to find a place in this world, both for Danny LaRusso and for all the characters. Even people like Johnny Lawrence are lost because that is a big aspect of being 16 and 17, and that's why kind of the synergy between the teen drama and the martial arts film works so well. Aging down the characters, even by 4 years, just completely throws the balance of this film into complete and utter disarray, quite frankly. So, with that in mind, what does this movie have to offer? A beautiful filming of Chinese landmarks and Chinese culture, most of which were possible because Jackie Chan was involved with the movie. He could literally just say to the Chinese government, "Hey, I'm Jackie Chan. Can we film here in this place, in this very secret and beautiful place that has not been filmed since The Last Emperor in the late 80s? And the Chinese government was like, yeah, you can because you're Jackie Chan, so we can make that happen, which is very funny, and it does pay dividends with how pretty a lot of this movie is and how reverent it is to China and to a lot of the various landmarks and beautiful things that can be found within this film. Going back to the age of the characters, there are pieces of this that really work with them being young. There is a beautiful scene, the best scene in the movie for my money, where Dre walks up to the house of a young Chinese girl that he is kind of into and has caused her to almost put her future into jeopardy. So her parents say, "Oh, you can't hang out with this kid anymore." And so he reads a really clumsily translated kind of impassioned speech in Chinese to this girl's father to try and apologize and state his case. And Jaden Smith is killing the scene, and it is really sweet and honest and charming, and you feel a different energy than the original film has. You feel a sense of confusion, not because there are hormones and trying to become a man, but it is trying to find out what it even means to be a human being in the first place, especially in this new environment, in this new language, in a language that he does not speak. So, with that scene in mind, it is very clear that there is a way to tell this story and to structure the thematic points of the film in such a way that still can work. And the problem with this movie is that there are scenes like this, and then it will just completely devolve into references and recreations and just not totally getting what makes that first film so special. The first time we see Mr. Han, Jackie Chan's character, he is doing the chopsticks with the fly, and we never get that again. It is just a reference, and it misses out why that scene is so notable from the first film. It's notable because, A, because he explains it, and B, because Danny LaRusso gets the fly. And Mr. Miyagi goes, oh, beginner's luck. And you see a character moment from him of this jealousy almost, and this envy of this kid for having the youth that he no longer has. And a lot of that is down to Pat Morita's performance, of course, but there are so many moments like that in the original film that say so much about the characters without being too blunt about it or too about-faced about it. And none of that really hits here, especially whenever it's trying to do the exact same thing. By the time we get to the actual tournament, it all feels so hollow, and it feels so much like nobody understood what made that original film so resonant with so many people. The weird thing about talking about the Karate Kid remake is that as a film on its own, it's not bad. Jaden Smith is very serviceable as a young performer, and Jackie Chan has a lot of screen presence that can really ground it in a very similar way to how Pat Morita did, where it's good to watch him because he knows what he's doing. And when we hit the really big emotional moment in the film, kind of the analog to Morita's Mr. Miyagi being drunk and explaining his trauma, it works. There is good stuff here. But looking at this as a remake of the original film, and even trying to not be super precious about the original film and those original characters, there is just a complete disconnect. Because in trying to be a remake of The Karate Kid, that's where this movie fails, in my opinion. It doesn't have anything of its own, really, outside of those few special moments that completely recontextualize the story and make it its own thing. And when it does that, like I said, it really works for me. I started to get a little bit emotional during some of those scenes, and I was compelled, and I was forced to stick my eyes onto the screen. But whenever it sits back and tries to redo the original film, it is so hard to pay attention to, and it's so hard to care about it, quite frankly. And it's just not the kind of thing that I find much value in, quite frankly. Which sucks, because there are things with value in this film. It is so much lesser than the sum of its parts. It is a movie that there is a great movie in here. If it wasn't almost 2.5 hours long, which it has no reason to be this long, but if it wasn't 2.5 hours long, if it tried to have its own identity, if they just stopped trying to make a Karate Kid movie and just made a movie with a similar DNA and a similar ethos to that original film, then I think there could have been something really wonderful here. And I think that's a big reason why, even though this movie was a mild critical success, and I think a lot of that was because people expected this to be terrible, and it's not, and it was a pretty sizable financial success, there has never been a return to this iteration of The Karate Kid. I know they were working on a sequel at one point, but it's all kind of floundered, and now with the release and roaring success of Cobra Kai, I don't think we will ever see a version of this ever again. Which I get, honestly. I don't really want to return to this world, which is a shame. Because there is something here. There is something unique and something interesting in this film with these new characters and with this new setting and aesthetic and philosophy. But you can't make something unique while you are so trapped and stuck within the type of movie that it is clearly contractually obligated to be. With the chopsticks and with the putting the jacket on a rack and putting it off and doing the exact same thing as the wax on, wax off moment, it just feels so hollow and so empty and so corporate and calloused, quite frankly. It's a dour moment to end this retrospective on, but I would like to use it to reiterate what I said in the earlier pieces, that there is something really special about that original film, and there is something that captured culture and captured the zeitgeist and changed people who watched it. It's not a perfect movie, but there is something about it that it has that energy to it, and everything that has come afterwards, even the second film, which again, I do quite like, everything that has come after has just been in the shadow of that energy, and in the shadow of what it could be. And I think that is the best compliment you can give to the original Karate Kid movie, is that while it is not perfect, and there are parts of it that haven't aged wonderfully, nobody, not even the people who made it, have ever been able to recreate the magic on the silver screen. So now, I am going to watch Cobra Kai, and I'm very excited about it. And because this isn't the TV podcast, I'm not going to talk anymore about the Karate Kid from here on out. So thank you for joining on this little weird detour with me, and I look forward to whatever we're going to be looking through the past for next. This has been the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, if you could be so kind as to leave a review, that really helps us out. Also, if you would, again, be so kind as to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and or Twitter, it really helps us out to know that we're getting more ears on the stuff that we make, because it's good stuff. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.